Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thanks so much for joining me as I start a new project with the Derwent Inktense Watercolor pencils. Now I wanted to show you the front of the box because I keep talking about this in other videos, but I forget to make a video of it. I want to show you the front of our box. In the US, they do call them watercolor ink pencils. So when you hear me say watercolor pencils, and I hear you say, stop calling them that. This is why I call them that, because Derwent actually put that on the American box. So I am picking up the sea blue, and I'm going to be coloring in basically this whole thing. I'm leaving a few areas open for some yellow, and you'll see me switch colors in a minute. But while I'm coloring on this, I wanted to say, if you would like to do this project with me and you would like to color along, I do have my contour drawing available on my blog, and I'll put that link down below. So you're welcome to either print this off and trace it, or if you want to draw with a grid, I've included it on there with a grid so you can see how the grid would work out on this piece. Or if you just want to draw it free-handed, feel free to do that as well. And if you want to trace it but you don't have a Lightbox and you have an iPad, I have a video down below for that as well, where I explain how you can take your iPad and turn it into a Lightbox. So this is part one of a two-part series on this. I'm going to try to do it in two parts. You know how slow I am, so hopefully it's not going to be three. But in part one, we are only going to be using the Inktense pencils. And in part two, I'm going to be putting a Graphitint on the entire piece. So we're going to cover the whole thing. We're going to color it completely out. And actually, I could have stopped with just the Inktense pencils, but I'm using the Inktense on bottom to give the vibrancy that I cannot achieve with the Graphitint. So I thought they would be a good base, and now I'm picking up the yellow, as I said that I would, and I'm coloring in some areas that I want to be a brighter green, and I'm using that as my base. But we're starting with the Inktense because once it's on there, because it is ink, it's going to stain the paper, it's going to stay on there, and then I can layer other things on top. I could layer more of the Inktense pencils if I wanted to, or I could do, as I'm going to do in part two, and put the Graphitint. So I don't know how this is going to turn out. I've never done an entire piece with the Inktense and then put the Graphitint on top. So whenever you're watching this video, if you're watching it as I have posted it, I can tell you, and now I'm switching to deep indigo, I'm doing this for the dark spaces in there. You can see the deep indigo. I do not know how this is going to turn out. So I'm not waiting to post this to see whether or not it works out. If it fails, I wanted you to see it fail. So you'll have to stay tuned for part two to see if this is a win or a fail. But right now I'm basically loosely blocking in colors. And I forget what these flowers are called, what this plant is called. It's a succulent, and they look like flowers to me, so I'll probably call them flowers through this whole thing, but it's a plant, and they have wonderful green, purple, yellow leaves. They're just, and there's one red one in there, and they're just so pretty. So here I am with that mop brush. That's the Winsor & Newton mop brush that you saw me with at the beginning, and I fully intended, because it holds so much water, I fully intended to use that to get this wash on here. However, if you've watched any of my videos, you know what brush I'm about to pick up. I make it about this far and I go, oh, forget this. Where's my size 8? Where's my Roland Langnickel size 8 round? There it is. So I'm going to go ahead and loosely come in here and block in all of these colors. And you can see they overlap. It's not really pretty. When we get to the end, you know, some people would say, oh, trust the process. But if we're honest, as artists, 90% of our art is just putting something on paper or canvas and praying that it works out. It's never really a process, unless, you know, flying by the seat of your pants is a process and experimenting is a process, then okay, trust the process. But honestly, for me, It's putting stuff down and just seeing what works. I get these ideas and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. So as you can see, I am rinsing my brush when I switch colors. So I've been working with the blue and then I went to the yellow. All of this is going to be green and purple, so I'm not really concerned as if the yellow bleeds outside or the blue comes inside where the yellow is. It doesn't really matter to me. I do kind of want to keep it centralized, so I want to make sure I do have that yellow right in the center of those little flower things. So I am going to just be moving that around. Kind of, it looks haphazard and really it kind of was, but I'm just wanting to fill the paper, and then I'm going to let this dry and I'm going to come back and concentrate on the darker areas in the background so that we can separate these out. Now when I drew mine, I used, I think it was a B lead, so it was a pretty soft lead. And I come back with a kneaded eraser and roll it over the top to kind of knock the lines back a little bit, because I'm not using ink on this right now. I can't decide if I want to use it at the end or not. Again, we'll just have to wait to the end and see what I do. But I wanted just to use pencil. And you do have to be careful because the scrubbing motion on this does sort of lighten those pencil marks. So if you do use a soft lead to draw this in, be mindful that when you are putting the water on, some of that graphite from the pencil will dissipate and you want to be able to see those lines. So some of my lines, if you look at it at the end, if you are following along, especially in the upper, I think it's left hand corner, might not be exactly like the picture because I kind of rubbed all of those lines out. So it was a little bit of an ad lib there. So, but it'll all work out in the end. No worries on that. If you are following along, I do have a freeze frame coming up of this part, and I'll have to say it's not pretty, but just be prepared for that. So that freeze frame is coming up right now. All right, we want to pick up our deep indigo, and occasionally I will call that dark indigo. I go back and forth, but I believe the actual name is deep indigo. And what I'm looking for here are the dark spaces in between the plants themselves. And some of these darker spaces are actually leaves that go down into the shadow. So we still want them to be this darker blue. And that's going to be a good building point for not only the Inktense pencils when I add other colors with those once I add them on top, but also for the Graphitint. When I start adding the Graphitint, that gives a good base for that, because it is kind of hard to build up the darks in Graphitint. So it will take more than one layer with the Graphitint once we get there. So I'm trying to do all I can on this original layer with the Inktense to build up those darks so I don't have to work so hard when I get to the Graphitint. We are coming to the end of that deep indigo, putting all of the dark shades in, and then we are going to have a freeze frame quickly, and then we're going to pick up another color before we add water. And this is our poppy red. And you'll notice that all of my pencils have a nice sharp point. You're not seeing me do that on camera. I'm actually doing that off camera to make certain I keep a nice sharp point on these. But it is important on this piece because we do have some tinier areas where I don't want that color to go outside of that area now that I'm kind of blocking in these shapes a little more tightly and getting a little more exact on things. So it's important to keep a nice sharp point on those pencils. And I know that this poppy red is going to work well with that dark indigo, deep indigo. I told you I'm going to go back and forth. That indigo, I missed a spot there, so I came back with my indigo and got that in. We'll just call it indigo. So I know it's going to work well because I swatched these colors in an earlier video before I ever started using the Inktense pencils. And I think it's a good idea when you have new colors like this that you experiment with them and you do some swatching. And I'll put that video down below too. I'll try to remember to do that so that you can take a look at that. And I show the entire swatching at the end, so you can take a picture of that. If you don't want to do it for yourself, you can see how mine turned out. But that's why we are layering them together, because they're going to work well to give me a nice dark color underneath. And really the key to this is keeping the same pressure for that poppy red that I did for the indigo. And that way the colors will come out where they mix together a little better, so you're not too red on one thing and too blue on the other. And some areas I did want a little heavier red, and you'll see that once we add the water. And we're actually almost ready to add that water because that red is coming to an end. And once I finish with the reds, you're going to have a little bit of a freeze frame so that you can take a look at where we are so far on this step, and then we will immediately start with the water. As promised, we are starting with the water now, and I'm making sure I have a nice sharp point on that size 8 brush before I get started, because I do have some smaller areas. Most generally, I move in a circular motion to get all of the pigments to mix together on the paper. You will see some back and forth movements. This is an interesting area in that a lot of spaces on here you're going to see that the color gets darker as it goes underneath some of those petals of the plant or leaves. I guess they're leaves. As we said, it's a succulent. And how I achieve that is I work from the outside and move it toward the darker area. So I'm starting outside the color area, already moving in a circular motion, and then I'm pushing that color where I want it to be the darkest. And it really helps if you will get a little bit of water on your brush. You'll see me wipe my brush occasionally and go back to the water. If you get a little bit of water on your brush once you have that color on there, and then go to the part where you want the color to be the lightest and start working from that area towards that darker area. Having the color off of your brush, and you'll see me wipe it there again, having that color off helps you push more color to the darker area, push it out of the lighter area and to the darker area. And this works well with regular watercolors, but the difference is if you're working with Inktense, you don't have time to, as I say, dilly-dally. You really have to move, because once that water hits the color, it starts to stain the paper. And if you wait too long, then you're going to have a ridge or you're going to have a spot. So you want to work in small areas when you're working more detailed. So I would recommend really moving once you get that water on the paper and start moving it around. You don't have time to question your life choices. You have to just go ahead and move that color around. But again, keep that rag handy. You see I have mine handy, and I'm continually going back and wiping it off. And I'm continually rinsing my brush, because I found out in one of my first experiments with Inktense that ink will stay in your brush. So if you don't want to move it somewhere else, if I'm working in a red area and I want to move up to the flower petals, to where it's yellow, I want to make sure my brush is clean because it will definitely carry those pigments where you do not want them to be. Just to make certain I have all of those pigments activated on there from the ink tints, I'm going back through and just checking a few spots that look like they might not be completely mixed. That's important before we start adding other colors or before I move on to the Graphitint, because I don't want to reactivate things that I do not want activated. And if you're following along, here is a freeze frame of where we are now. Time for a little more coloring on this. So I'm going back to the deep indigo again, and I'm also picking up the teal green, and I love the teal green. I love it by itself. I love it mixed with blue. So we are concentrating on, again, separating petals and getting a good base color in, because these are vibrant colors that I'm not going to be able to achieve when I pick up that Graphitint. And I'm using kind of a medium pressure on everything. I don't want to go too dark because, again, it's Inktense. I'm going to make a mess if I'm going to be picking up color when I have too much on there. So it's always easier to add more, but really hard to take it away. So kind of use a medium pressure when you're putting these colors on. just a bit more coloring with this indigo, and then we're going to pick up that teal green and come back on top. The purpose of the indigo was to get some nice dark green in there, and by putting it on bottom first and coming back with the teal, I know where to put the teal and about how much to put on there. So this is going to give us some good depth and some good color interest, especially when we move on to that Graphitint. This is our last little area before we move on to the water, but I want to give you a quick freeze frame so you can see where we are before we move on. Let's take a quick look at the brushes I plan to use before we start adding the water. I'm going to have that size 8 round, and then I have some smaller areas like right in the upper right hand corner, and I've gotten out the size 2 round as if I'm really going to use it. We'll see if I do. Chances are I probably won't. Again, I'm using a circular motion, and I'm using the same procedure of going from the light area and moving it into the dark, because there are some areas where I need, especially right there, you saw I needed to kind of blend that out because this gradually goes to lighter colors. So you're going to see the same process that I used on the background, I'm going to be using on the petals. I have been moving around the entire page and I've been avoiding that upper right hand corner. So now I have to make a brush decision, and I chose the size 8 round. The size 2 round came in the Royal and Langnickel Zen Series set. There were several brushes in that. There was a flat one I used for a wash, and then a scrubber brush, and this size 8 round, and then this size 2 that, bless its heart, I just never pick it up. I've used it. I think the last piece that I did for you guys, where I did the building front, I used it on that. But anyway, we're almost done with this, and I have a freeze frame of where we are coming up right now. I was talking about life choices earlier, so now I'm making a life choice of whether or not I want to use fuchsia in this piece, and I'm really contemplating it, and I decide, we're just going to go for it. But I do some knuckle popping while I'm thinking, and yeah, we're just going to use the fuchsia in this piece. I have some purples that are super, super bright, and I know how bright this fuchsia is going to be because I have done that swatching previously, and I'm using this pencil extremely lightly. So if you're following along, when you pick up that fuchsia, I'm not doing a medium pressure. I'm using it sparingly, and I'm doing a super light pressure on this. I really had to make some decisions on where I wanted to put this so that my purples would be bright enough when I got to the Graphitint, but we are just about finished with that, and now it's time for a freeze frame of where we are on this step. As we add the water on this, you can see that the fuchsia is definitely fuchsia. The pencil name does not lie. It's definitely fuchsia. And I was very happy that I had put it on, but yet used it very sparingly and super light. I could always add more on, and there are some areas that are a little brighter than other areas. You will see that. But I'm glad I added it on because I think it's really going to help with the purples and the Graphitint. So again, you'll have to tune in for part 2 on this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. As we are nearing the end, I actually could have left this piece just like this and I would have been perfectly happy, but I'm the queen of not leaving well enough alone, so I'm going to have to add that Graphitint on there. So I do hope you will join me for part 2, and thank you so much for being here for part 1 and for your comments and your likes on all previous posts. It means so much to me. That's it for now, and I will see you in the next one.